So in some ways I've been dreading making this video for some time now, but I always thought it was going to be inevitable. I want to talk today about free speech and why it is so all-encompassing to my worldview, and to explain some of my stances on these things and some of the reasoning behind them. And there's not going to be any kind of video or anything like that to go along with this. I'm just going to be talking, and I don't know how long it's going to go on. It could be an hour, it could be 10 minutes, just as long as it needs to be. It's not going to be scripted in any way. It's just going to be a bit of a conversation, shall we say. You might notice a bit of background noise. There is a fan going, and it's hot. There's no way of getting around that. I'll try and edit it out if I can. But in terms of what got me thinking about doing this, a friend of mine, Cac Mage, bless you, sent something out, and it's on screen now, obviously. You can see it for yourself. And it's a confirmation of something that many of us have believed for some time. This push for regulation of thought and speech, it's been going on for some time, and many of us have believed that it isn't really about what it claims to be about. Ultimately, what you got to bear in mind is people like David Brock, John Podesta, Soros, if you will, the Democrats, whoever you want to draw into this, in particular the media, is that they've come to the realization that you can get people to do the things that you want to do if you give them a personalized reason to do it, and you make what you want to happen be a knock-on effect of this, if you will. So it's collateral damage. The classic example of this, and I've covered this before, I believe, is this concept of calling everybody a bot or whatever. Bots aren't particularly intelligent things. If you've ever had a conversation with one on Twitter, they spew out garbled rubbish, and they're never going to pass a Turing test. So either the entire left believes that there are sentient AIs wandering around Twitter that can literally dissect and critically deconstruct what they're saying, to use their own terminology there, or somebody came up with a rather clever idea to get people to shed the concept of anonymity. Because ultimately, if you are told day after day after day after day after day that you are a Russian bot, if you're in it for the bants, you're not going to give a shit. But if you are a normie that just happens to have a few slightly risque views, shall we say, you're eventually going to get sick and tired of this, and you're going to say to yourself, fuck it, I'm going to take off the mask and reveal my identity, because I'm tired of constantly being dismissed. Now therein you've got this idea that the leftist believes it's a win for them. They are not saying it because they want you to give up your anonymity. They are saying it because they want to shut you down, or because they want to give themselves an excuse to get out of the conversation, because they know they're not going to win. But you can achieve multiple goals with a single strike if you plan it correctly, and you understand the concept of memetics. It's an interesting idea that's worth exploring, I believe. Where this sort of concept originated from, who was pushing it initially. I'm willing to bet there was a blue check involved. So yeah, back to but it kind of plays in, it kind of doesn't. The concept of this SJW culture it's relatively new in its current form, but it's been going on for a while. No one can deny this. Bubbling under for a long time. And the real bit that scares me is that I look around and I see people on the left that want to shut down free speech because it hurts their feelings, and they get triggered, to use, again, their own parlance. And at the same time, I kind of see people on the right that are like, well, we're going to shut down them from saying what they want to say. Neither's good. We have lived under free speech for me, but not for thee, for far too long now. And I think it's warped a lot of people's perceptions on things. It's become a power game. It's become, we can't have you expressing your thoughts when we take over, because then we'll just end up back at square one. And I don't think we will. I mean, you've got to bear in mind what they've been doing here. As I said before, it's been something that's been building for 40 at least years. You can trace the roots back very far. I have no doubt that similar tactics were probably used in the dying days of Rome. Barbarians complaining that Roman privilege was a real problem and needed to be taken care of, usually with a knife in the back, I would imagine. They were rougher times, shall we say. Now, for me, one of the reasons that I've always been such a booster for free speech is I genuinely believe it can solve probably 90% of the problems that we currently face as a society. If you want to talk about specifics, I think when we talk about things like integration of new cultures and what have you, I think we need to have the ability to critique in order to reach a general consensus to what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. If you create subclasses that are beyond reproach and demonize European culture, should we say, in my case, or American culture, in the case of the States, what are you creating? You're bringing people in and saying, well, no matter what you do, within limits, we're going to forgive that, but we're going to come down like a fucking ton of bricks on anybody on the other side of the aisle that says the wrong thing. It's weaponization, ultimately. The social media, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, it allows you to cast out and have conversations with people that you would probably never encounter in your real life. It's opened up so much communication. But at the same time, with a culture of censorship, it's not really so much censorship, because they'll argue, from the perspective of it's not the government stepping in and what have you. But the reality of the situation is that certain views are acceptable on social media and certain views are not acceptable on social media. And it is coordinated to such a degree that I don't think, honestly, it's possible that there are not conversations going on behind the scenes as to what these collective policies are going to be. You could argue that this is kind of an information cartel, if you will, because social media plays such an active role these days in terms of how people interact with and to a certain extent get the news. I don't watch the BBC or Sky to find out what's going on when there's a terrorist attack or a mass shooter or whatever it may be. I go onto social media because 9 times out of 10 they're going to be about 2-3 hours ahead of everybody else, and by the time the media gets hold of it, the real conversations, the narrative has been set, and that's what people see, and that's what gets talked about down the pub, the headline. Nobody talks about the detail of the story to a certain extent. Well, some people do, but they're generally up their own arses. But what people talk about is the overarching themes. And how to put it? The retractions will never get discussed down the pub for the most part, unless a huge stink is made about it in the media, on social media and what have you. And that's gradually getting shut off. So you have this concept of, well, we can make truth. And in some ways, I think, the companies that put these false headlines out and what have you, they don't go out their way to make sure that people see what they're retracting. They'll put the retraction out to avoid any kind of legal hassles and what have you, but they'll not promote it. They'll not, it's gone. And I think in a lot of cases, people selectively will not run corrections. I mean, I generally don't, unless something is absolutely false, I won't delete it. But what I will do every time is I'll connect up something about it, and I will probably stick out multiple tweets saying, look, I was wrong. Here we go. Because truth matters. Always has. And in this age of hoaxes and, every time you end up with some would-be activist or blogger who gets their hijab ripped off or gets a bent, contorted swastika painted on their house and what have you, more often than not, at least, they seem to be turning out to be hoaxes, particularly the ones the media grab hold of. But once the information's out there, the narrative's set. And if you criticise that, they will shut you down. They'll make sure that the people correcting are shadow banned, are deleted, are hidden from searches, whatever it may be. There's all sorts of ways they can do these things. But here's the thing. You may find these people objectionable. You may say, well, I don't want to see that. So skim past it. What's the point in sitting there, working yourself up into a fit, unless you get some kind of weird, perverted joy out of it, which in some cases I think people do. And that's part of the reason that myself and several others have been digging through past histories and what have you. And I've got no problem saying this, because I know that, again, context never makes it through, and I have a small following of people. This is not going to be a probably widely listened to segment, but here's the thing. I'm not calling for anybody to be fired. I'm not calling for anybody to be doxxed and have their lives ruined. What I'm doing is saying, take a look at this, and sending a message out there. Others are doing the same. And what happens is that it then gets discussed. And as time marches on, and as the conversation goes from online to offline, and it becomes a chat amongst a couple of friends down the pub, or bar for the Americans out there, that original context will be lost. We won't make it through. And then you kind of let loose into what has been created in recent years, which is this utter culture of outrage. Let's get this person fired. Let's ruin this person's life, etc., etc. I don't need to call for somebody to get fired. I don't need to dox this person or ruin this person's life in any way, shape, or form. I just need to put the information out there, and the climate of outrage that's been created will take over. And because that outrage has always gone one way, I think to a certain extent the other side has been shielded from this to a certain extent because the media plays ball. But when you find things that are genuinely creepy, when you create something that is truly viral, it really doesn't matter. The media's going to have to cover it at some point, because it's going to be that conversation down the pub, and people are going to start to wonder, why aren't they having this conversation on the news? Why aren't they talking about this revelation that I heard about while I was 3 beers deep? And that's very dangerous, because if you're trying in some ways to control the narrative, you can't let people see the strings. You can't have them notice that you're feeding them one side of the conversation. But that's the beauty of it. And they know full well. I mean, you know, if you go back to that leaked document from, I think it was David Brock, the ShareBlue briefing on the actions they were going to take and how they were going to get Facebook to play along and start banning accounts, and how they were going to put out so much information that any smaller messages were getting drowned out. It's all coming to pass because they set the climate, and all they have to do is chuck a grenade out there, and the new moral majority, otherwise known as progressive culture, will take over, and angry, bitter cat ladies will protest whatever they have to protest and shut down people's lives, and it's the way it is now. And I think in order to come back to some kind of sense of normalcy, we need to make the other side understand that this is a problem. Integration of new cultures would be easier if we could agree on a common culture between us and have an open, honest conversation about it. You may not agree with what these people have to say. There's a classic example that happened with British politics, where for a long time, you know, the BNP were growing and growing and growing, and they were always this sort of Voldemort of British politics. People didn't talk about them directly, and you know, they were just kind of in the background, and they represented a very angry, isolationist, they were radicals, shall we say. Well, they were radicalized simply by being kind of cut off from the rest of society and shunned. They felt lost, and they were easily taken in by people who would seek to push some quite poisonous ideologies to a certain extent. However, they then got somebody came to the bright idea that, you know, just put him on a public stage, stick him in Parliament. And when the public saw what they represented, they became pariahs. Okay. Now, you can argue this from two angles. You can say, well, that's outrage culture. Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. If you give somebody a platform and you say, you know what, you can get up here and you can contribute, if they then throw that back in your face, you can do whatever you want to do. If they act in a pernicious way, shall we say, you can say, well, you know, take it to the ballot box. But the problem is, that was an effective technique to use on the right wing, because the media is always going to have that bias to it to a certain extent, and things will be misinterpreted. I mean, the British Nationalist Party, to a certain extent, there are some ideas that are pretty poisonous. There are, I am sure, a lot of people that join that party that joined them because they were the only party necessarily that was saying, we want to restore a sense of national identity. Now, how they were saying that, you're more than welcome to disagree with, and I do to a certain extent. But when you get involved with politics, and when it becomes something where you feel, I need to associate with this particular tribe, whatever it might be, I need to feel a sense of belonging, and I'm going to do that through politics. You pick the person that most closely resembles your ideology. Now, it may be that nobody represents more than 50% of your ideology. Maybe that the maximum you can get is 25% of your ideology. But on those areas where you can agree with that person, you're going to vote for them. And, Labour, Tory, old school GOP, Democrats, there's no real difference there. So anybody who was offering something different from the mainstream, if you were genuinely disenfranchised, that would begin to appeal to you, because your voice wasn't being heard, because your ideas were just immediately dismissed as evil. Nobody ever took the time to explain to you why. It's just, you're disgusting, get out of here, we're not going to stop until your life is over. Sound familiar? James Gunn? And yeah, this culture's been created where people are told to just sit down and shut up. And the only way things are going to get back to any representation that would seem to give some kind of normality and bring people back together is by opening up conversation. I'm not saying we're going to have strictly right-wing conversation or strictly left-wing conversation. Just start fucking talking again. You believe in something? You should be willing to defend that belief structure. And you shouldn't need to say to a person, I'm going to get you fired, or I'm going to get you banned from this website. It's weakness. It's people saying that I can't be bothered to have that conversation anymore. I don't believe in what I believe in with enough conviction to be able to turn around and dispel this. But then you start to think to yourself, well, do they really believe in it that much? Is it something that is it something that they want to believe rather than something that they actually believe? Are they hoodwinking themselves into doing it because they feel it's somehow noble? And is that healthy? You bottle things up and bad things happen. You look at somebody like Cruz, the Florida shooter, and yeah, he was, according to his classmates, he was vile. But they also just pushed him out, rather than trying to say, well, look, you're being a dick, here's why, and giving some genuine critique rather than just this, we're going to shut you down bullshit. And there's a lot of things that have got to be done. I mean, gutting academia is one of the things. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother video, because what I want to talk today about is this current cultural tidal wave and why it's so poisonous, and why we've got come to the conclusion that at the end of the day you need to feel the sting in the tail on this one, whichever side of the aisle you're on, because the only way we're going to get past this is to get 60% of the people on the same page. That's all you need. You can't do it with 50, 51. You need 60% of the people. You need to get to the point where people can't be shouted down. conversations can be had. You need to appeal to those blue dog Democrats, those moderates, those business Democrats. You need to bring them to the table and say, look, the radicals on both sides are insane. And by that, I don't mean all of the white nationalists. Some of them have perfectly reasonable considerations. Doesn't mean that what they want is necessarily going to be implemented, but they have perfectly reasonable contentions in some aspects. When one side is screaming to remove all borders and the other side is saying, well, let's just have a border, which one's more radical? Yeah, there's poisonous elements. I can Neelan. Just fucking boomers who have discovered pole late in life and gone off the fucking deep end. Not in Campbell's case, he was always a nutter. He just does whatever he can make the most money out of. But there's poisonous on both sides. It's there. It's vile. But there's a lot more than just these polar examples that get held up and used to justify either this narrative that the Ku Klux Klan's coming to get you, or this idea that, Antifa or suicide bombers are hiding around every corner. There's a lot of middle ground, there's a lot of grey area. And when everything gets punched down into 240 characters or, a 30-second video, context is all lost. And that's where debates have gone to a certain extent. That's where free speech has gone. People aren't taking the time to explain their positions anymore. It's just, this is what I believe. Here's a slogan. Here's a chant. Here's a this. Here's a that. It's bite-sized fucking opinions. And it's poisonous. It can be funny, granted, but it's poisonous. I do see the irony in taking this position, but I just see the utter ludicrousness of the world these days and feel like I can't resist to dive in. And besides, I tend to write ridiculous 30-40 tweet chains explaining things, so I can hardly be held to the task of not providing context or evidence. Well, evidence in most cases, sometimes it's ramble. But that's the beauty of it. When we have free speech, we can just fucking ramble. We can shoot the shit. We can come to conclusions that simple, soundbite, focused arguments can't even come close to. Sanitized bullshit. And that's the key takeaway from all of this to a certain extent. Do you find a certain culture's practices unbearable? Okay. Stand up in front of a group of people without the risk of getting fired or having your life ruined and explain your position. And then allow them to explain their position. And without any filter, without any camera tricks or whatever it may be, just let people watch it. Go back to being a culture with a media that just presents the facts to people. If you can do that, you can solve just about every fucking problem that we have. If people don't want to play ball, fantastic. Off you go. You can go back to where you came from. If you want to join in with this collective culture, then it's a culture, of critique, as they say. But that means that everybody gets to give their critique. That everybody gets to give their 2 cents. And if you don't like it, fine. The internet is a very large place. Filter that person's name out on Twitter if it really hurts you that much. Block them, mute them, do whatever you want. I don't care. But this concept of I'm going to come after you for something that you said 10 years ago is fucking poisonous, and it's been going on for far too long. So, at some point, the Buddhist monk that is conservatism, that has sat there and 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 taken those hits time after time after time after time, is going to lose his cool. And he's going to turn around and he's going to beat the shit out of the next person that comes along and tries to throw a punch at him. And it's going to be violent, and it's going to be bloody, and it's going to be fucking horrible. And it's ridiculous from both sides, because people forget that a lot of the liberal side of the aisle is white as well. So if you're the kind of person that believes that white people are under attack and becoming an endangered species, or whatever it may be, why do you want to start a conflict that is going to take what is already a small percentage of the global population and turn it into a significantly smaller percentage of the global population? It's not smart. I have no doubt I'm going to get heat over that, but there it is. What I want to do, and what I've always wanted to do, is to break this apparatus that has been used for decades to silence one side of the conversation. And people need to feel a personal investment in a situation in order to understand it completely, to see all sides of it. When it affects you, you will object a lot more to increasing the... It's the old thing about Harry Reid with the nuclear option. McConnell warned him it was going to come back and bite him in the arse. And only when it does the left begin to realise maybe we shouldn't have done these things in the first place. You need that moment of realisation, you need that moment of personalisation in order to wake them up to what they're doing. That's the answer. You can call me a shill or a hypocrite or say that I don't believe in free speech, but I'm doing this because if we carry on down this path, we're going to get to a point where it becomes more and more radical, and whether it be the left or whether it be the right, somebody's going to come in and go, well, that First Amendment, what am I saying? Fucking hell. Doing it live. They're going to say, well, it's time to start restricting that. And it'll happen little by little. It'll be death by 1,000 cuts. But once you start that process in motion, it's like a snowball going down the hill. It's going to get bigger, badder, and uglier. And it's going to come for us all. Unless we can wake up 60% of the population. And we can go back to saying, okay, yeah, well, you can throw around these ideas of the melting pot and what have you, but you need to be able to freely discuss what matters in the world and not stick to these ridiculous foregone conclusions of settled topics, settled science. We should always be challenging popular thought. We should always be saying, is there a better way we can do this? And the only way you're ever going to be able to get back to that kind of scenario is by empowering free speech. Because sometimes, we have elected politicians. There are hundreds of them in the Senate. But every once in a while, somebody out there in the ether, because of some conversation that was never supposed to happen, will hit upon something that really matters. Some new concept, you know. Not everybody is born to be a politician. Some people have got skeletons in their closets, remember. We are seeing that unfolding over the last couple of days. But if we create this, if we perpetuate this fucking outrage culture, those people will be silenced. And as much as I always liken it to Alistair Campbell, I can't stand the bloke. He is a prize cunt. Genuinely vile person. But I can appreciate the fact that the man is incredibly intelligent. He is incredibly good at what he does, which is spin. And much like many evil people over the years, he's to a degree charismatic, less so since the referendum. But I can see those positive qualities. And I think when I look at his work, and he, in particular, I mean, if anybody's read the Alistair Campbell diaries, some fascinating ideas in there. You know, I have to agree with 95% of what he says, but if 5% of it's worth a damn, you bet your ass I want to listen. Fuck it. And this idea that one bad idea should preclude somebody from being involved in any more public debate, or, you know, we've had the recent scandal with Papa John, for example. Now, he said a very naughty word on a conference call, and that's objectionable. You know, maybe he should have come out and he should have apologised, which he did, but people don't want to accept that apology. Outrage culture. Now, they're going to kick him to the curb. Papa John's itself will probably never really be able to get away from this because it's been fanned into such a frenzy. Does him saying the N-word on a conference call preclude him from being able to run a successful pizza company? Will the next person coming in be able to bring the same things to the table that a man who took one location and turned it into an empire? Can they possibly hope to bring the same skill set to the table? Or are we going to end up with some diversity hire designed to look good for press and what have you, that drives the company into the ground? In the world of free speech, somebody can say something horribly offensive. They can piss a lot of people off, no doubt, you know. But think about how many people are employed by Papa John's. Think about how much business they're going to lose as a result of this, because of something foolish that one man said. Now, if they want to fire him, that's fair enough. But for fuck's sake, let it be an assessment of a weighed, moderate response, rather than just, we are going to mob you until you do as we say. Let it be a conversation between them and their employee, rather than a national debate. Now, I'm not suggesting by any stretch of imagination people can't talk about it. That would be ridiculous. But what I'm saying is these fucking... There are literal bots that you can send, I think it's a tweet to, and they will call on your behalf, or email on your behalf, various senators and what have you. It's fucking dial and outrage mob, if you will. They talk about the Russian bots and what have you. It's being used in both ways, and it's so fucking transparent. So yeah, I think I've rambled, and I've talked about a few things. I just want to get back to a world where we can have a fucking honest conversation with each other, and we can walk away from it and say, look, I don't fucking agree with you, but thanks for the conversation. I do this with people that are on the left all the time if they're willing to actually have the conversation, present some evidence, and actually try to change my mind rather than just shrieking and pulling out their hair. It's fascinating. It's wonderful to have your beliefs tested if you have genuine conviction in them. You love having those conversations. And that's ultimately the best way I can kind of sum up this whole situation. And again, I push you back to the tweet that's on screen. It's a weapon. It's a weapon. They're trying to pick a fight and change people's minds on things not by showing them the error of their ways or offering an alternative hypothesis. It's just, fuck you, we're going to ruin your life. And as long as that carries on, me and others like me are going to show you how this tactic really works. And we've been doing this. Many of us that are doing on this have been online for a great number of years. We know all the tricks. I myself have a bit of a history with things, but I choose not to employ certain tactics anymore. But as returning to the metaphor of the Buddhist monk, I'm only going to let you hear this so many times. And then here we go. There's a lot of anger out there. And there are some of us, there are some people that are looking to exploit that and ride it to a right-wing wave of my ideas only, fuck you. All I want to do is take away the tip scale. And whatever has to be done to do that, whatever tactics have to be brought to bear. Obviously, strictly online. Nothing in real life, because there are lines that I'm not willing to cross. But things will be brought to bear. This is only the opening volley. We're going to bring ourselves back to center. It's just a question of time. That's it, I'm done.